It's the start of day 2 and I left the legs overnight to dry. The wood was still a bit wet, so that it hasn't set as much as I wanted it to, and I don't have enough clamps. So what I've had to do is I've had to put some screws in at regular intervals just to keep it clamped together. I'm going to have these turned in, so here's the notch. The table is going to rest on this notch. I'm going to have the screws turned in towards the center of the table so that they're not so visible. The good news is that I don't have to do anything with these legs for a while, because I need to join all the planks of wood together for the panel, and that's what I'll do. First thing to do is to put the pocket holes in. The pocket holes are all drilled into one end of each of the boards. The next thing I'm going to do is to lay down a cross piece and butt up each of these boards to that cross piece to make sure that I've got the right width, and then I'll start looking at the length of each of the boards to make sure that I can cut them down to the right size so they're all even. With the boards laid out, I was able to butt them up against the cross piece and then measure how long I wanted the table. Just to choose an arbitrary number, I chose 5'6". It doesn't necessarily matter how long the table is, because the cross beams are a set size and the legs are also separate, and I can fit them in where I need to. I just need to cut some braces to length, and I have enough 2x4 to be able to do that. Next thing to do then is to cut the cross beams to size. I managed to measure one of them shorter than the other, so I'm going to take the longer length and use that as the guide first, and if that happens to be too long, then at least I can cut that down, I can trim that off. And then I also need to cut the boards down to size so they fit the size of the table. The boards are cut to size. Now what I need to do is to put the pocket holes in the other ends so that they can screw into that end piece there. And I'm also going to screw in a cross piece to stop the tabletop itself from bowing. Now that all the holes have been drilled, next thing to do is to screw all the pocket screws in so that the boards are attached to the end pieces. In the interest of showing when things go wrong as well as when they go right, you would have noticed that while I was screwing the pocket screws into one end of the board, that when I went to do the other end, the lengths of the board were not as even as they should have been. So when everything got jointed together, there were some boards that were higher than others. And that meant I tried to be clever and use a flush saw to cut everything so that they were all even, but in doing that, on the other end, what I managed to do was to kind of get it at an angle as I was cutting it. What that meant was that when I tried to screw all the pocket screws in, that the cross beam didn't sit right, and it was kind of lifting up. It was bent like this. Now the problem with that is that that means that the table isn't flat when you turn it over. So I tried to correct it, and that didn't work. Tried to be clever and use a length of 2x4 just to make sure it was square, and then draw a line across it, and then try to cut the boards to size. That didn't necessarily go according to plan either, so I ended up trying to use the jigsaw, and really I should have used the circular saw, but it is what it is. I now have everything at the right length. It's relatively flush. The next thing I need to do is to actually take a small diversion and build something called a cross-cut sled, because I need to cut some notches into the 2x4 so that they all join together. So this is me making a cross-cut sled. Okay, so we're going to title this episode Don't Do What Donnie Don't Does. The eagle-eyed viewers out there would have noticed a couple of sparks as the blade hit this screw, because I stupidly put it in the middle of the base, which I forgot about cutting the groove in the sled here. So here's a warning to everybody: don't put screws in the middle of table saw blades, otherwise you get lots of sparks. To recap what I did, I cut two runners out of 1/4 inch plywood. They were 7/8 of an inch wide, which is the same size as the groove here. It did require a bit of sanding just to get these to fit snugly into the groove, but they fit quite nicely now. What I did was I propped the runners up on pennies inside the groove so they stood slightly proud of the tabletop, they weren't flush. And once I put glue on the front face of the runners, I could then press the base on top of the runners and leave that to set for a little while, and then I put some screws in to attach them to the base. So the base is 3/4 inch plywood, and I created 2 fences for either side of the sled, and both fences are made out of 3/4 inch plywood, 2 pieces glued and screwed together. The furthest fence doesn't need to be square with anything, so I was just able to stick that down and I screwed that into the base. The nearest fence I did have to make square, so once I got through the sparks, I cut the groove into the base, turned the saw off and then raised it to its fullest height, and then used a square to make sure that the blade was square with the fence. And then I put a pivot screw in here, made sure it was all lined up, and then fixed it on this side. And then on the base we have screws where all the fences are screwed together, and then obviously the sparking screw in the middle that I forgot to take out. So now I have a cross-cut sled. The next thing for me to do is just put it's mainly a security piece of wood, a sacrificial piece of wood, which means that if I push the sled forward and the blade comes through all the way through, it doesn't cut me. The whole purpose of the sled is to be able to cut notches in the legs of the table, because I need to do half lap joints with some of the cross braces on the legs.